I'm Jenna Seery, a bookseller and associate producer of Poured Over, and today I am so excited to be joined by Scaachi Koul, who is the author of one of my favorite essay collections, One Day We'll All Be Dead and None of This Will Matter. She's a podcaster, a writer at Slate, and now the author of a new collection of essays, Sucker Punch. So thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thanks. What a nice introduction.
I try.
Wow.
So, as someone who has read your work, I hear you talk on podcasts. This book, a lot has changed for you from when we last spoke in your writing to now. How does it feel to be putting this out right now?
That's a good question. I'm trying to remember if this is what it felt like last time, and I can't recall. So I don't know if this is typical or if this is how it felt last time, but I'm just like, I'm ready. Let's go. It's been such a long time. I signed the deal for this book 7 years ago and then just couldn't get it done. And then wrote it really quickly after my separation. So I am ready. I feel actually weirdly moved on from a lot of the stuff in the book, which I think is good progress. But yeah, let's go.
Yeah. I think so often when people talk about people putting out like essays or memoirs or very personal writings, they're like, oh, how does it feel to be vulnerable? But your work is standard for you. So it's not, It is not the same as maybe some people who have no real experience sort of putting themselves out there. I mean, this is obviously vulnerable in some ways. There are a lot of other people involved, which I think can play in interesting ways. But this is sort of where your career has, I feel like, a natural progression for your career.
Yeah, I mean, memoir writing is weird. It's a weird beast. It's a complicated balance to strike. But I don't know. I have a pretty high bar for shame. So, I feel like a lot of the stuff I've written about in this book, it's like, what are you going to make fun of me for saying something that a lot of people feel and something that a lot of people do? It's only risky because we say it's risky. But the themes in the book, divorce, which, around 50% of, the US will get some form of divorce, or at least will have one massive common law separation in their lives. The stuff I write about rape culture and sexual assault, an overwhelming percentage of women have faced sexual assault. It's underreported. We know these things. So I kind of feel like we're all going to die. So
That's what I've heard.
Yeah. We're going to, I don't know if anybody's told you, but we die at the end of this. So I don't care anymore. I think that was something that was really freeing about my divorce, is that it just sort of took away my interest in anything ever.
I think that that's a lucky lesson to get to learn young, right? I think that's something we normally feel like we hear from people who are going through their big midlife disaster, whatever that may be, and then they get to go and say, oh yeah, now I don't care anymore. But there's something really freeing about getting to say it in your 30s.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of women I know are saying it in their 30s. I think we're just a different generation than our parents. It's happening at a different scale. I think we're getting divorced in a different way. It's happening louder. Yeah, and who knows how that'll mutate in my life. I'm only 34. I don't think this is the end of it. So I'm sure I will forget and learn this lesson 1,000 times over. But right now, who cares?
Yeah, there's something very reassuring about knowing how many great and awful things are still ahead of you. It makes me feel good to be yeah, okay, there's going to be wonderful days in my life and some really awful ones, but we just keep going.
We just keep going. We have no choice.
Since we're talking about essays, and that is sort of I don't know, I feel like it's an underrepresented form a lot of times in conversations about literature, especially in memoir. I'd love to talk a little bit about sort of your process for compiling these. You said it took you a longer time maybe than you had anticipated to get these all going.
I don't know how other people are doing it. I'm doing it in a really bad way. I think it's taking me a long time. So I signed the deal for this book about 7 years ago, and I had big plans that it was going to be an essay collection about conflict, about the utility and the futility of conflict. And then I started working on it, and everything I wrote was bad. My editor would read it and be like, nice try. It's bad. Go do it again. And nothing was really connecting. And I had written, just for myself, about 20,000, 25,000 words. Hadn't sent it to anybody yet, except for the first 3,000 words I had sent to myself. I don't know why. I was trying to get it on another laptop. And then my computer crashed, and it took that entire 20,000 words with it, and it was gone. And I had to start over, and all I had was the first couple thousand words of this draft that was now lost to the ether. And then a couple of months later, my marriage ended. And so then I was really like, okay, everything that I have worked on is gone. The life that I thought I was living is over. The story I've been telling myself is a lie. And I have to adjudicate this with this contract that I have for a book that I agreed to write under very different circumstances. Also, I have a job. I need to try to do my job. So I just stared at those first 3,000 words and just thought, okay, this is what I thought was happening at the time. And that's not accurate. So what else wasn't accurate? And then just spent a lot of time sitting at my desk thinking about it. I was thinking about it all the time, but trying to process it into a story that felt like good fiction, because that's how a good essay collection really functions.
Yeah, I would say both of your collections, I feel, are so cohesive that they really don't feel, I think sometimes like essay collections can feel a little bit like this is scraps of other things that I am kind of putting together because they don't have another home, or I want these, But both of your works, especially Sucker Punch, I think really work narratively. Like you can just read it straight through and be like, oh, there's a bigger story on top.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Sucker Punch more so too, because I don't think you can read it out of order. Those 3,000 words that I didn't lose in that data crash are still the first 3,000 words of the book. When you start reading it, I'm like back there with you. Like we're starting from 7 years ago, and I'm going to drag you into the present. It's going to be really uncomfortable. It's been really funny to read some of the Goodreads reviews. I generally stay away from Goodreads, but I find that before a book comes out, you kind of get an interesting sense from like readers and librarians and people who read a lot. And a lot of the reviews are like, Jesus, like, what a slog. I'm like, yeah, it's a slog. You have to come back. You have to come forward with me. I don't know what else to say. I didn't feel like I could do the disparate collection anymore. I don't have enough work for that to do the like slapdash essay collection. I wish I did. Maybe I should be more prolific.
Well, there's time.
There's time. You're right. Yeah.
As you're like forcing people to go on this journey, you're like, let me hold your hand while
like how else can I torture them? Maybe I got to do the David Sedaris thing where he like he just published like his diaries. I can do that. I should do that. They would be like way less interesting, and perhaps would end. I don't know if that's actually a great idea for me in any context. Something to think about.
It's there to roll around in the rock tumbler, just see what comes up.
Yeah.
I'd be like, well, if you're ready for my diary, you're going to hear a lot about the things I've eaten, and that's going to just have to be enough.
Yeah, there's probably some identity I need to protect there.
Yeah, well, that's probably true. I think, too, like, that is sort of an interesting piece of all this as well, that along with all the really uncomfortable piece, there's also, like, having to let people see the mundane parts of your life, too, and, like, that can almost, I think, be more vulnerable, not just like, oh yeah, these are these really heightened dramatic moments, but also the moments where it's like, oh, we're all just real people doing like weird stuff sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, pain is mundane. All of it is mundane. Like heartbreak is unfortunately actually quite mundane, but we just don't look at it that way.
Right. Especially to this idea of like feeling like you were uncovering along with you, like what is actually happening.
That's sort of what was happening while I was writing the book, which was that like, I didn't really know why we got a divorce. I couldn't figure it out. And then as I was writing it, I was like, oh my God, of course. Yeah. Right. Oh, it was doomed. I see.
Oh.
And so, I wrote it that way. I think it's interesting that way. But I get it. I think that can be a painful read for some people because it is. I wrote that in the immediacy of my separation. I'm still only a couple of years out if you really think about it. So like it's still everything's still hot in the text.
And having those moments where you are reading something and you can be like, oh, maybe I've never felt that, but like the bigger feeling, I know what that is. And feeling just that like pull of like, oh, I know what you're going through in those moments. And especially the ones where you feel like, oh, should she be talking about that yet? Or like, uh-oh, like being worried, but then also being like, I'm just glad somebody's saying it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, what do any of us get for not saying it? I've never gotten anything for keeping my mouth shut ever. Yes. I've only been rewarded for speaking.
Right. And I think there's also like that healthy voyeurism that people get of looking into those moments and being like, oh, I don't think I know what that's exactly like, but maybe now I'll have a little bit of a better idea going forward, especially in those confusing moments of like, oh, this is something you can only see afterwards. There's like literally no way to see it in the moment. And that's like the most terrifying of all.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you were writing, I guess going back to this idea of what we write about and how we do it, I mean, you're writing a lot about other people. Were there any concerns about like, what do I say about my ex? What do I say about my parents? Because I think generally, people have very different perspectives on how to treat those topics.
That's a good question. I think with my parents, I didn't think about it as much in this collection because I think they're just present in a different way. Mm-hmm. And I wrote about my mom more, and writing about my mom just feels like writing about myself. What I'm writing about her, our experiences are so twinned. So it doesn't feel unique in that way where like I'm telling on her. Like I'm telling on all of us. Like all of those chapters, all the stuff that has to do with like the women in my life is like really universal where none of it feels specific in that way. But beyond that, I mean, I don't have anything to protect except for the truth. So I wrote what I felt was appropriate and honest. But it's still only like maybe 20%. I don't need to tell everybody everything all the time. Maybe I'll do it later. Who knows?
Right. You have to keep some things for future.
I have to parcel it out. But the only thing I have fealty to is reality.
And I do think that comes through so strongly. Like, though there is so much of your voice on top of, you're telling things, you are telling your own story in your own way, but never in ways that feel like, I think there's a version of this. Obviously we all have our own versions of everything.
There is, yeah. There's 1,000 versions of everything. This is only mine. Right. But I can tell you for sure that this is my version and it is the only version of my version. There isn't a secret. I don't have a secret second thought about this that I'm not being honest about. I don't know if that was happening with my first book. That's a good question. I don't know. I think about that sometimes if I had it in my head that maybe things weren't what I thought they were, what I was hoping for. But I do know that I was splitting narratives through my life in order to feel comfort. I was like dissociating as we all do. It's, perfectly reasonable thing to do considering how the world is going. But I know that this version, though it is only mine, and so it is not complete because it's only mine, is the fulsome version that I wanted to offer. It is 100% of the 20% I am willing to give people, but it's all true to me.
I think that is also sort of a danger in writing memoir, is writing the truth, but with these little twists that are like, this is the truth as I want it to be. And that doesn't really serve anyone. It certainly doesn't serve ourselves and our readers to sort of twist that around to present the best story of the truth.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of divorce books end or go through some process of like, and then she met somebody else and then it was fine. She got remarried. And so there's a million versions of those narrative tropes that I just didn't want I didn't want to get into, and I hope have not. But yeah.
I wonder too if there's people who are kind of like, oh, Scaachi did not really offer essay, and then it was happily ever after, and then she was fine at the end. It's like you are like,
I'm
this
sure.
is it.
I'm sure people have complaints. I can't wait to hear them. I always hear them in vivid color. So
right, it's like, she didn't make it all better for us, so.
yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. Well, I don't know. There haven't been enough reviews for me to sort of identify what like the prevailing negative review will be. But I think it's probably a more polarizing book than my first one, so I won't be surprised.
And I think like what's interesting about that is that what will be that negative review for so many people will also be the most positive review for so many others, in that
Right.
It doesn't offer you this fake, like, oh, she just waited until everything was fixed before she put this out. It's like, no, you sometimes you have to put it out in the middle.
But it's just, I mean, it just doesn't exist. Like, I don't know what everybody's talking about. Like, I don't know anybody who feels like all that settled in any context, married, divorced, single. Like, I think you're just I've tried to become a little more accommodating and accepting of the fact that I have no control over anything. And everything I do is increasingly directed towards controlling things. And it's not helping. It doesn't do it. Catastrophizing is fake control. You know, planning is fake control. It's all fake. And I accept it. Like, okay, I give up. And so if I waited until I felt like things were in order before I wrote anything, which is sort of what I thought was going to happen with my first book. And I learned that lesson with my first book. My dad still wasn't talking to me when I published my first book. And there's an essay in there that ends with like ambivalence about it. And I don't know what's going to happen. And I didn't know if he was going to talk to me by the time the book came out. He did, because I got engaged. And so I learned like, oh, I can do that. These are living documents in a way, these books, even though they're not. But to me, they feel like it. And which is why Sucker Punch does sort of relitigate the past. It is an attempt to sort of correct some sort of record, because I think that's valuable. And I would want that for anybody else. I would want it for myself.
Your third book is just called It's All Fake, I think is what.
It's all fake and you're going to die sooner than you thought.
Yes, and that's the message.
And that's all three. And then I'm out.
And then, yeah, done. Never to be seen again.
Yeah.
I do really appreciate the way that your two books are in conversation with each other. I do think that there is a lot of reference in Sucker Punch to the ways that you've sort of changed, and saying that situation that I referenced before, well, here's what it actually is and how it is now. And I think that that's important, because it does remind us that you don't have to have looked at things the same way, even if you wrote it down and published it. Like, you're still allowed to change how you feel, and it will happen no matter what.
Yeah, I think I spent a lot of my 20s feeling really stuck in my ego about my decisions. Every decision had to have been the right one, and it had to have been the only one that I could have made. And that kept me unhappy for longer, because I wouldn't just let myself be done. Like, I love bailing. Like, I've really learned to love bailing. I actually don't have to do anything. There's so few things that I really, really, really have to do. And a lot of the stuff I was doing and I felt preoccupied with, a lot of the stuff I think a lot of us feel preoccupied with, you have to do it. It's hard to give yourself permission for that. But, you know, I felt my divorce felt so humiliating. But there's like a lot of freedom in that. Because then you're like, well, it can't get worse. It actually can't. Like, once you access that feeling, that panic, you know, you like have lost a lot of protection. You don't really know how you're going to move forward. Like, God, who cares?
I really like that sentiment, because I think it's so easy to get caught up in how important we think we are. And when I sit and think about everyone I know and everything they've ever done, like, I don't know, who cares? I don't really care about the terrible things someone's done or has happened to them that I'm sure feels so significant in their lives. Like, I don't know those things. And so to have that freedom of being like, oh, no matter what happens in my life, I just get to keep living. It's fine.
Yeah. Like,
until I don't.
And then one day you don't. And then it's done.
Yes. Speaking of like some of the best parts of the book is hearing your relationship with your family. I really love the descriptions of your relationship with your mom in this book, because I think that it is such a different perspective on sort of a memoir about a relationship with my mother. Like, they're so often like really, really tragic, or my mom is my best friend. And it's like, okay, well, what's the in-between here? Yeah, we fight and we have some crazy interactions. And yet when she needs help walking up the stairs after her surgery, and, you know, you're there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm very tender about my mother. And I think so much about the kind of life that she led and the life that her mother led and the kind that I'm living. It's so like rote, it's so cliche, but like you can't help but think about it that way. I think a lot of women sort of think about their lives in that continuum. My divorce was the first time me and my mom had like a really big difference in experience. Even though there were other things, you know, my mom never dated. Well, my mom was an immigrant by the time she was 24. She came from India to Canada. That's a way bigger change than me like moving to New York from Toronto. Like, it's something, but not quite the same thing. But by the time I was divorced, that was really like, oh, there was no way for her to talk to me about it. She didn't know what it was. She didn't understand it. We would talk about that, but she didn't know how to talk to me about it. And I think that actually forced us to find more common ground, because it was this like strange foreign thing. And she didn't know what to do with it. And I didn't either. And I think she'd grown up thinking there's a certain type of person who gets divorced, and they get divorced for a certain kind of reason. And those reasons weren't apparent to her here. And those people were not apparent in this divorce. So it wasn't really the story she had been told either. And then, you know, she's gotten older. And so that has changed everything exponentially, which continues to happen. You know, I feel like I'm watching it in real time. There's nothing I can do. Watching your parents age is the encapsulation of how little control you actually have. All you can do is witness it. And so I am a witness to it. I have no choice.
And that is something that I think we don't want to ever confront or think about or look at. And it's on that list of like topics that we just keep in a drawer.
I don't want to either. I don't want to either. I'm not dying to do this, but I just don't know what else to do.
Yeah. And I think that goes so much with the sort of narratives that we feel are like acceptable or unacceptable to talk about, especially if you're a woman, especially if you're not white, especially if you are queer. There are so many like things. It's like, okay, we expect to hear about this from certain types of authors, but we're not ready to hear it just across the board from anyone.
I mean, I think also the expectation for women, and I think for a lot of brown women of color too, is that you have kids. Right. And so then that becomes your preoccupation. You have children. It is reasonable to be a wound up caregiver for your children, but not for your parent. Like that's sort of lost in the translation of it. I don't really know what's going to happen. Like, I don't know what my parents' needs will be or what we will need to do or, you know, how that'll look. But I'm writing a lot about domesticity, but I'm not having a traditionally domestic experience. You know, I don't live at home. They don't live with me. I don't have kids, but they sometimes feel like my children, which I think anybody with aging parents feels like that sometimes, where you're like, she's on TikTok all day. It's so annoying. Right. She's not listening to me.
Please don't click on any links in a text.
Like they're like using my credit card on Temu. Like it's infuriating.
Yeah, your info is on the dark web because of them.
I've given up. Yes. They're going to dox themselves.
And you're like, again, this is fake. We have no control.
They have no control. Can't do anything. Must accept. Must accept. Must accept.
And I think that also goes into sort of this idea of now living in a world where like everyone's not personal information necessarily, but also that, but like your life is just available for consumption for anyone. Like if you choose to interact on social media, on whatever, like you're just like leaving yourself open for consumption now.
Yeah, but I also think increasingly everything is about consumption. Consumption is capitalism, and capitalism is like in the water. So at this point, I think it's almost impossible to opt out. Like, you can't do anything without a smartphone. You need some sort of smartphone capability. During the pandemic, it became so necessary. If you didn't have a smartphone, you couldn't look at a menu because everything became a QR code. So you have to participate in that way. Surveillance culture is omnipresent. Anywhere you walk, there is CCTV footage of you walking. And, it's always funny whenever I walk through Times Square, which I try to do almost never, as little as possible. But like when you walk through it, you're like, there are 7,000 high-res images being produced of me in this second.
I don't look good in any of them.
And I don't look good in any of them. Not one of them do I look good. But like, from like people trying to sell you the photo from a tourist stand to the cops or whatever else, like I think a lot about the decision I made when I was much younger, when I wasn't thinking about surveillance like this and the amount of information I have offered about myself and about my feelings. Now it is abundantly tied with capitalism because it is how I pay my rent. So I don't know. I get it when people opt out of it. I understand. I don't know if I would make that decision, but I mean, I'd be a different person. So yeah, maybe if I were a completely different person, I'd make that decision.
I'm like, I don't need to write a memoir. Yeah, y'all can just compile it from the stuff that is already out there about me.
Yeah, this is the thing too, is like a lot of people sometimes talk to me about that, like, oh, you're really revealing yourself. And I'm like, not more than some of you are revealing yourselves on Instagram. I promise you. Like, I have just packaged it. Put it for sale. Mm-hmm. Like, but I like it. I like it. I think I used to be more private and it made me feel lonelier.
But I think it is that's the flip side. That's the other side of the coin, is that yes, we are sometimes over-connected against our wills, but now we also live in a world where we can connect with people about things that we used to not be able to talk about. I mean, there would be a time where you would not have been able to talk about your divorce in public because it would have been...
No, it would have been verboten. You also, like, you had to have an argument for why you were getting a divorce. Every divorce memoir used to be like, he cheated on me and then he killed our dog. And that's when I knew I had to leave. Like, there are terrible stories of like heart-wrenching abuse, like like it's trauma porn in some cases. Doesn't mean those stories are bad or that they have no value. It just means that's the kind of work that was being produced because we believed that the only time a woman could leave was because this guy was torturing her. And sometimes it's just like, you kind of want to go. And so what's interesting, all of these stories that are coming out like last year and this year about like, oh, the divorce book is like it, when All Fours came out, everybody was like, the divorce book is here. Now it's happening with some of these memoirs. Haley Mlotek's No Fault came out a little while ago. My book's out. Lenz's book came out last year.
Maggie Smith.
There we go. Yeah. There's all these like, right. So they come out and everyone's like, wow, look at this trend in divorce books. Divorce books have been around for a really long time. Like Heartburn came out so long ago that like I have like the 80th cover that they have made for this book. What is happening is books that do not dwell on justifying to you why she left. Those are the books that are now being made. So when you read a lot of them, they talk about, even mine, though I tell you some of the reasons why eventually I left, I don't tell you until late because it's not that important. Mm-hmm. I'm telling you because I do there's relevancy to it. I have to tell you to some degree to get you to like conceptualize what I'm talking about. But a lot of those books don't give you like a clear reason. They're talking to you about the feelings and the structures around it and what they were thinking and how they were trying to deal with it. That's what those are about. That is like whatever trend is sort of living in this idiot man-made ecosystem that we have here. But like, and that's exciting and new.
It feels like it's on my list of like, why do we have to be talking about this? Kind of, it's just like not in a way of like not letting women and people tell their stories, but in like I can't believe it's on my list of like, I'm so incredulous that this is still being adjudicated, that we are still like questioning. And yet that's everything now.
They're banning books in elementary
school.
I know. Of course. No shit.
It's just on the list of.
Add it to the list. Add it to the list.
And it just doesn't end. And I have no control and I'll be dead. And so it's like the refrain.
It's very freeing.
Very freeing. It makes me just feel like when I can get sort of into these books and let myself just sit in a life that isn't mine, it's like, of course that's why we read. It makes me be like, of course that's why we read. Of course that's why we write. That there are experiences in Sucker Punch that I will never have, can never have. And yet I feel like I have a little bit more understanding than before I opened the book. And isn't that the whole point of being alive and being a reader, is to like learn?
That's it. I can't think of another reason. So it better be that.
It better be that. That's what I've been doing. So I hope it.
That's what I've been doing. Yeah.
And going through those things and finding stories that connect with us, even if they are completely different and outside of our own experience, that feels like the only way forward in so many ways, to be like, I have to keep finding the connection.
It's all we have, buddy. It's all we have. Like, this is a darker timeline than I could have conceived of as a younger person. I don't know, how old am I anymore, but
it's like, best not to keep track.
Best not to dwell. Yeah. Yeah. And so that's it. Like, we take care of ourselves. That's always been true. Now it's extra true.
Going off of that, I feel like I have to ask, as a bookseller, I'd love to talk about literary influences and some things that you love.
Sure. Oh my God. Now my hands are sweating. Okay.
Yeah. Well, you will have forgotten every book you've ever read.
Literally.
As soon as I ask.
Can I read? I don't even know. Let's find out.
Yeah.
What is your question?
So, literary influences. Who are some of your books that have made you a writer, made you a reader, and some things that you love?
So, I grew up like from really young reading a lot of like white man essayists. Like it's because they started selling David Sedaris books at Costco in like 2001 in Canada. So I got all of his books. I read all of his. I read David Rakoff. I started buying all of Jon Stewart's first book is a weird short story collection called Naked Pictures of Famous People. I loved that book. I started reading Dave Eggers and I really loved him. Then I started reading McSweeney's. And then I started watching a lot of stand-up. And then, eventually turned back around to essay collections and read like the classics and did like all of the Sad Girls, the Didions and the, Eve and all of them. But yeah, that's what I did. And then I watched a lot of television, more television than one could ever even conceive of, which I know is not the answer booksellers want. And they want like a beautiful answer about like my prosaic literary tastes. And I'm like, yeah, it was like a lot of Maury.
And that's perfectly understandable. I think that the truth is, I mean, half of my job is writing and reading literary fiction. I'm also like, but then I go home and watch Housewives.
Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, I was raised in a news junkie house. So it was a mix between news, different kinds of news, documentaries. We watched so many documentaries when I was a kid, and then like old sitcoms. So All in the Family, and we watched Seinfeld on a loop. Like, you could get away with anything in my house if you could get somebody to laugh, but if they didn't laugh, you would get in so much trouble. So being funny became important. Yeah, like watched a lot of 60 Minutes and read the paper. And my dad, back in the day, had a subscription to every paper that we could get to. And so we would get, I think, 3. I don't even know if they do news. Do they do newspapers anymore? I haven't even.
I know in theory they exist.
In theory they exist. Yeah. If you stay at a Best Western, they give you the USA Today.
Yes. When I used to work at a Walgreens, I would have to undo them and put them out. So okay. I in theory they do still exist.
It's good to know. It's really good to know.
And I mean, you do also write in a more journalistic capacity, and so it has clearly seeped into you.
Yes, in my day job, I'm a journalist for the internet, which is different.
Yes, that's
than newspapers. Heard. But yeah, so I used to read a lot. I was a big reader as a kid. Reading, I still read a lot. It is also the first thing that goes when I have stress or I'm having any sort of medical issue at all, I will cease to be able to read. So clearly it's a precious resource that I'm not protecting.
It all connects in different ways, and all we can do is hold on and hope for the best, I think.
You're right.
Especially now when like half of what I'm reading, I am miserable and scared the whole time. And I'm just like, I think that my brain is starting to Pavlov the wrong way when I read.
I think, I mean, it now is a testament for why fiction is valuable. I read a lot of fiction. It's predominantly what I read, frankly, for pleasure, because it's a slog. I don't want to have to read more about the world when I've already read about the world all day.
Yes, you're writing to us about the world, so you have to.
Yes.
Yes. And you have a new, like a column now about divorce.
Yeah, I have a divorce column at Slate called Now That You've Left. So it starts at the day that you decide to go. That's it. So I feel like a lot of advice columns, people ask questions and the advice is like, leave. Like, you need to leave, you need to leave, you need to get a divorce. And that gets boring because that's not really the end of the advice. So it's fun. We're starting at the end, which is where I like to be.
You're like, this is, you've done that other part, but this is the part that I think everyone is like, and then what?
I am here to divorce doula a generation of women out of their marriages.
Perfect. You're like, if you're just handing out business cards
I'm ready
outside
to go.
the law offices.
All you need to do is call.
I love that. So if you could imagine sort of like a perfect reader for Sucker Punch, or someone that you really hope finds this book like on a table in a bookstore somewhere, do you have someone in mind?
I'm happy if anybody reads it. I don't really care who you are. I hope you like it. And if you don't, that's fine.
Message, DM you directly, any of your questions or concerns.
Yeah. Oh, like, no, never talk to me about anything. I don't want to hear from you. Let me be clear. I do not want to hear from you. But I hope you like it. But if you don't, that's fine. Don't tell me. But that's totally fine. Don't tell me.
Don't tell me.
Don't tell me. Do not tell me. But that's fine. I accept.
Fine.
Can't do anything.
I think that there will be lots of people who find some real connection in this book and understand where they've maybe been, or how to get through something that seems so insurmountable, because that's all we can do, as we've said. Keep going.
So. I hope so. It's the book that I think I would have liked to have read when I was going through it. So I'm proud of it.
Yes, I think there's a lot in there, and it just is a great testament to sort of where you have been able to find yourself, even at a time when I think many people would be struggling in a way that they could not even put the words down on the paper.
That's you to say. Thanks.
So are we going to have to wait another 7 years after this? Okay.
At least. I'm leaving. Goodbye. I think it would be good to be missed.
That's true. Yeah, you never want to flood the market. You have to...
I'm going to go away. I think I have been a workaholic for 15 years. So it might be good to maybe take at least a couple of months. I haven't decided how to do that yet. But no, I'm booked out for now.
I think that's fair. And you've got this one to sort of give it its own moment to shine.
It's not even out yet. It's not even out yet.
And sometimes you're like, maybe cool it on big book-worthy events for a little bit.
Yeah, I'm tired. I can't have any more life events, man. If something else happens to me in the next 2 years, something is amiss.
Let's hope for the best. Let's hope for getting through this book tour and all of your successes on this one. I can't wait for people to get their hands on Sucker Punch, because I do think it is something very special. So thank you so much for talking with me today about it.
Thanks. That was fun.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.